Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Enterprise JavaScript Done Right, the tools you love, the security you need. My name is Danielle Wombold, and I'll be your moderator. I work on the marketing team here at NPM, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. I'm pleased to introduce today's NPM speaker, Ahmad Nazari, CTO. Before I hand it over to Ahmad, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about the presentation in the BrightTalk webinar platform. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the same link you're using now. We've also added some attachments which are available through the attachment tab at the bottom of your screen. This is where you can find today's slides and other related content, as well as a link to all of our past webinars. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for Ahmad, please feel free to send it through the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering all questions at the end, but please feel free to submit your questions at any time. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we will be sure to follow up with you afterwards. Now over to Ahmad.
Thank you, Danielle. Hello, everybody. My name is Ahmad Nasri. I'm the CTO at NPM. I just recently joined the team at NPM here, and I'm leading our product and technology teams. As a contributor to the open source community myself, I've led and contributed to many open source projects over the years. And just recently, before joining NPM, I led a large team of over 500 technologists in the telecom space, very exciting, where we build all sorts of technologies and solutions using JavaScript and Node.js, from web to e-commerce applications to data processing and middleware APIs. A big focus for me has always been on security and data privacy, especially in a telecom context. I can tell you a lot of interesting stories there, a lot of the challenges and lessons that I've experienced in both the open source side of development, as well as building enterprise level technology using JavaScript. So hopefully we'll shed some light on some of the best practices and the improvements you can adopt to your own team's workflow. First and foremost, just some level setting here. What is NPM for those who are not familiar? NPM is the keyword that represents a few things. So let's start with the CLI, which is where a lot of our developer community is most familiar with. The NPM CLI is the command line tool that developers use every day in their workflows for installing, discovering, and running their JavaScript applications. It's also part of your CI and CD environments that are used for deployment and installation of open source and private packages. NPM also represents the public registry, which is the centralized service that we operate that serves both the open source and free software development, code sharing, as well as your private packages and private organizations are hosted on there, all centralized in the public registry. It also represents the website. When we talk about NPM, the website, that's where a lot of the community features and the discovery features for our open source and private package users for discovery and for collaboration on open source projects as well as private projects. And of course, last but not least is the NPM company, which is NPM Inc. that employs us all, that helps operate all these systems and all the open source solutions that we've created. So, the joke here is naming things is hard, so we just went with the easiest option, which is naming everything the same. Doesn't add any confusion. So again, let's just talk a little bit more about where NPM fits in the developer workflow. So NPM really is the backbone of JavaScript development, whether it's in publishing or discovering of packages or the workflows that developers go through every day. We know we have around 11 million developers from all around the world downloading about 50 billion downloads monthly, and all accessing public packages at around 1 million public packages, not including all the private packages that are published and maintained. We don't obviously talk about the private package numbers, but the public ones are just indicative of the growth of JavaScript in general. And speaking of JavaScript, JavaScript is where modern software development stacks happen. 93% of JavaScript developers all use NPM, whether directly or indirectly as part of your CI environments or your local development practices. We know that from surveys that we've run into our community and other surveys in the JavaScript community, people use JavaScript primarily for work. A lot of that happens in the web or middleware technology, and NPM is definitely at the heart of all of it, whether it's through the open source package discovery or the tooling and solutions that we offer, whether it's in the command line or in the registry solutions. So when we talk about open source and when we talk about security, when we talk about these million packages and the billions of downloads we're seeing every day, we know from asking developers that there's a lot of concern around security and around the pipelines and around the workflows that developers adopt and use in their businesses, whether this is a small team of 5 developers or a large enterprise business of hundreds of developers. So we know that 83% of JavaScript developers are concerned today about the security of open source code in general. And only 14% of them are satisfied with the tools that they have in the industry to help them address those concerns. We know the concerns and the tools that are available in the industry are not necessarily, have kept up to the pace of growth that JavaScript communities and the JavaScript ecosystem has surfaced. So we're here to talk a little bit to you about the kind of enterprise level solutions that we're introducing that help you and help your development teams adopt a more enterprise-focused development workflows using NPM. So this is probably a visualization that you're familiar with. The JavaScript modularity is extremely interesting in the sense that you might be using 1 or 2 or 10 different packages, but those packages are going to pull in another 10x and another 100x and another 1000x packages and dependencies. On average, we know that the JavaScript application developers are using around 2,000 distinct modules and packages within their individual application. That's not to say how many across your entire business and across the entire organization. And of course, each one of those has different versions and different dependencies, and the complexity there is quite high. So whether you're in set 2 or not, the open source dependencies you rely on have a cascading effect in pulling in from many other sources behind the scenes. So modularity actually is a good thing as far as development and software architecture is concerned, but it does introduce risk and it does introduce complexities. So let's talk about the risks aspect for a bit. From a compliance point of view, obviously we know the processes, like I said, and the tooling that exists in the industry today have not kept up with the growth of JavaScript and have not kept up with the frequency in which these packages are updated. We know we have 42 billion unique packages downloaded monthly just from our public registry. We know about 4% of them contain known vulnerabilities, and about 1.6 of them are high or critical. We do have a scale of our vulnerability levels. So high or critical are things you really need to pay attention to. We know things like artifact storage tools limit collaboration. They don't support modularity in terms of building and maintaining and sharing code. And that's kind of where the enterprise level solutions today in the marketplace look like. And the story I like to share here in terms of some of the past experiences I've had, especially in the context of a telecom business, as you can imagine, the data privacy and the security concerns there are quite high. We've done all sort of security safeguards for our employees and our developers, whether it's things like firewalls, VPNs, keyed access to buildings. But the one thing that's always eluding for businesses of that side is the safety and security of the developer machine itself. And this is where, there's a lot of talk in the industry around vulnerabilities and security for open source solutions and open source libraries. And people tend to look at that only in the production context. What libraries are you using for your production level systems and what is going on to your server? But there's a bigger and broader scope to that as well, including what's going on to your developer's laptop and your developer machine. That same laptop that developers might carry and walk across to a coffee shop and use an insecure Wi-Fi network on, and perhaps take on family trips as well. So this is where bringing awareness to some of these misconceptions and making sure that your organization is able to adapt and lean in onto those security areas, whether it's in a local context for developers or in a production level environment context. So let's talk about NPM Enterprise and how does NPM Enterprise help you address some of those concerns. So first of all, what it is. NPM Enterprise is a single tenant private registry for your business. All the functionality and features that you know and love and your developers are familiar with from the open source public registry is used and shared for your private business and your private registry. So same behavior, same workflows. It gives you the ability to control access control for your team and inviting your teams through functionality like single sign-on. So administration tasks become a little bit easier. And then the security features that we're baking into it allow you to control and manage risks against and for open source development. So next slide. So like I said, if you're familiar with the NPM public registry, which most of your developers already are, or are on the path of adopting open source packages and open source solutions, then they're probably using it already, then you already know what NPM Enterprise looks like. NPM Enterprise sits between your developer workflows and the NPM public registry and allows you to do things like host your own private instances of packages for your own team and your internal collaboration, as well as introduce functionality and features that proxy into the public registry for better performance and for better security. So it gives you, for example, the opportunity to have unlimited private package publishing to your own enterprise instance. It proxies to the enterprise, to the public registry for any sort of security concerns and package filtering, and we're going to go into a demo about that in a second, and gives you the same ability to search and discover between both public and private packages, the same user experience that your developers and your teams are used to, without changing any of the developer journeys or the workflows. So from a risk perspective, account authentication and access control is a key factor in terms of providing access to your code bases and your shared libraries, package filtering and security policies. We're going to show you that in a second. It is a single tenant registry, so you have a little bit of compliance checkpoints in terms of where your actual code is hosted. The two-factor authentication on login provide even an extra layer of security on top, above and beyond the SSO if somebody doesn't have SSO enabled or OAuth enabled in their organization. And of course, gives you an administrative level control over tokens that your users are doing and setting up for their CI environments and their user accounts. Of course, comes in with the same NPM audit that's very well integrated in the open source workflow, and developers are already using it every day. So you have ability to even control that even further. And then it gives you even earlier access to vulnerability information before they become publicly disclosed. So we've done a lot of talking. Let's show you some of this stuff. So hopefully my screen is being shared very clearly. First and foremost, I'll just start by, again, showing you, this is a demo instance of what you will get as an NPM Enterprise user. As you can tell, the interface is very familiar to you. This is almost exactly the same as what you get with npmjs.com. So this is important for us because the developer experience is paramount for us to make sure that your developers are actually wanting to use these tools and adopting them as part of something they're already familiar with, as opposed to trying to train them all over again or give them something new. So I'm going to go through the developer workflow in a second, but I want to show you a little bit of the administrative workflow. So as an administrator, of course, you have all sort of controls for yourself for adding and removing users and administrating who gets access. You can invite as many users as you want, or if you're using single sign-on, you can provision them more seamlessly using that. I'm not going to go through a single sign-on workflow right now, but we do support OAuth, we do support OIDC, and we do support SAML. Pretty sure you've seen enough of those, so we don't have to show you how those things work, but just know that it's available for you if you wish to use it. And then we're going to show you a little bit about the security policy workflows in a second. So let's talk from a user perspective, how does this look? As a user and as a developer in JavaScript, I'm already familiar with npmjs.com. I might go and just look for packages that I want to use. My search functionality is, again, this is all happening on your company's dedicated instance of NPM. You might not be able to see the domain there, but this is demo.npme.io. Whereas if I go to npmjs.com and do the same search, I'll probably get the same result. So as a developer, my experience is the same when it comes to discovery and adoption of packages. I can do the same search I can do in the public as I can do in the private NPM instance for my business. The same level of information is available. And then the interesting part is when I want to start publishing packages for my team, say I'm part of a web development team and I want to start publishing packages, or maybe I'm part of, let's say, make it even more specific, a marketing team. Maybe the marketing team wants to start publishing some widgets, some information that is used for their development workflows or for another team in another department. This is where again, the same exact workflow that people are familiar with from an open source and npmjs.com perspective is brought in here. So I might be part of the marketing organization as part of this company. I have ability to publish certain packages publicly, and what publicly means in this context is other people in the company can see it, versus I can publish some packages privately, and what privately means in this context is only people who are members of this organization get to see it. Again, this is the same paradigm that you get from the npm.js.com public registry, but used in the context of your business, starts giving you even more detailed workflows and more control over who gets to access what. So you can imagine where you have a vendor coming in that might need access to certain things. You can create a different group for that vendor and start inviting them selectively to get access to certain packages. So let me show you how this works from a developer's perspective. There's only a couple of steps a developer has to do to update their already existent CLI tooling and already existing any tooling that has to do with NPM, like CI or CD environments. So here I have an NPM CLI. Nothing out of the ordinary here. I'm actually a couple of versions behind. The instructions are available for me on the homepage. So I'm just going to do a bit of a split screen here. So as a developer, when I'm invited to this instance for my company's NPM registry, I'm going to come in. I'm going to be immediately presented with the information. How do I configure my default registry? Well, first thing, I need to install Node and NPM. I have that. Check. I need to run the following command to tell my NPM client to point at this registry as the default. And that's it. It's done. What this actually creates is an entry in the user's npm.rc file. And now you're going to see my private token for a second. There you go. I have to reset that later, where that registry URL is set up. For publishing workflows, it's a little bit more advanced. You have to actually go and declare which scope you want to publish into. So I've already been invited to a couple of organizations here. So this could be your marketing team, your backend team, your front-end team, whatever team you want to name it or whatever scope you want to organize it under. Let's say I want to publish as a marketing team. All I have to do is go into my command line and specifically say anything under the marketing scope, make sure it's being published to this registry. So just to put that on a single line here for you to see. Oops. All I'm doing is I'm telling the npm CLI to publish to this URL. Now, what this is going to do when I hit enter, it's going to actually go and create a token on the actual registry website. And you're going to see it here in a second. There you go. It automatically opened up the browser page. It's prompting me to enter my password, which is, I'm not going to tell you, but you do have my token now. I do have to reset that. The interesting thing about tokens in the npm CLI context, as well for user context, you can set the access level right here and there. So if this is something you want to set up for your CI environment, you can make sure that this token is read-only. You may not want it to publish. In this instance, I want to do both. So all of a sudden, a new token that was created, my CLI is now updated, and now I can go up and actually start installing any of these private widgets or private packages that are within the scope of this organization. Great. So this is, again, very simple, very basic, very close to the developer workflow that you're all familiar with. Let's talk about the interesting feature that we just introduced recently, which is under administration, your admins are now able to create a security policy for how packages are used. Now, you're familiar with public vulnerabilities. You're familiar with challenges around disclosures of information and data leakage and vulnerabilities for your servers, but how do you protect against that? So we've introduced this feature called security policy. So as an administrator for this company, you can go in and decide to have a block level of anything that is critical or anything that's vulnerable to block everything. So in a critical level vulnerability, it means that your developers are going to go through a workflow like this, where they're going to run npm install. It's going to download all the packages. This is all going through the same registry that I just set up for you. The developers will see things like this, where it says, well, there are some vulnerabilities here. You need to use them. And again, they can use the power of audit fix, which automatically goes in and takes care of all of that. Effectively, what happened here is the vulnerability was under package.json. I had a version of Lodash that wasn't desirable, and npm audit fix just updated it to a fixed version. So let me revert that real quick, just to show you the impact. I'm just going to run this again. Oops, made a mistake here. So as you see, you can run npm audit, and it will tell you that there are vulnerabilities, or as part of your install step, you get the same level of information. So in this case, I'm a bit zoomed in. The vulnerability was in Lodash and something that is probably needs to be addressed, but this developer chose not to address it and continued on with their life. Now, you as an administrator, you can come in and say, block all these vulnerabilities, and then introduce a very friendly message, hopefully, or something along the lines of, talk to John in security to actually help educate your developers about the challenges that they might be facing when installing unsecure packages. So let's see how this actually works. Now, let me reset this real quick. If a developer tries to install a vulnerability that is within the security policy, let me just save this. Cool. And just confirm, yeah, we're looking at the right version. I think I changed my public registry. Let me just quickly adjust that. So the developer at this point will get the message to tell them to go and check in with their, I'm going to edit this on the fly. So we'll get the message, tell them to check in with their enterprise admin or their security team or whatever information you provided in that message. So we'll force them to make sure that they actually go in and be more diligent about their security and their dependencies that they're installing for the public registry. Again, the message they will get is just talk to John Security or whatever you present to them here in a meaningful way. Probably you want to give them something more meaningful, like this is violating our security policy. Please review our internal docs, and then perhaps you can provide a link to your internal docs for security kind of compliance. So this is where we can start introducing more features in the future around allow lists and block lists. They're going to start having the ability to actually selectively pick which packages and which versions of which packages you might want to allow. This allows within your organization. You can imagine where you can have this goes beyond just the security policy, but also goes beyond kind of architectural frameworks and architectural decisions that you can then enforce and or make sure that people are not installing something that might introduce performance impacts into your code bases. So that concludes our quick kind of demo of the story today. But just to recap real quick, the functionality that we're talking about here in terms of helping you reduce the risk on your organization, being able to filter which packages you want to allow for your developers to use, what level of vulnerabilities you want to block and allow, being able to control the tokens and the access control for each user within your organization. You can do that through organizations and teams within NPM. This is, again, the same functionality you get from the public registry, but you can now apply it to your team structure, to your organization structure, control which vendor gets access to what code and what applications. You can use the fact that this is a single tenant hosted registry, which means from a compliance point of view and an auditability point of view, your code is not being shared in the public cloud anywhere. And then obviously getting the power of single sign-on through authentication with OAuth or SAML for your organization for provisioning hundreds of developers if you so choose. We're also doing something interesting around your organization's usage of public and open source packages. We're calling this the Enterprise Vulnerability Report. It is currently in beta. What this gives you is a little bit more visibility into what's happening across your entire company. Again, whether or not you're using the enterprise or using public registry or have accounts on it, we can give you a little bit more insight to what your teams are doing and what your company is building in terms of workflows and what packages from the public registry are coming into behind your firewalls and into your developer laptops and into your production servers. So if you're interested with that, please check npmjs.com/enterprise and get a little bit more insight into that. And with that, I think we are at the Q&A portion now. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through a bunch of the questions that were asked. And first question, is there a way to see what vulnerable packages I'm using and my team? So that's what I was alluding to in the enterprise vulnerability report. Currently is in beta, but that will be a feature that we're going to be introducing into the NPM enterprise product. So it becomes as part of that workflow that you're designing, what you want to block, what you want to enable. Then you get reports on what has been blocked, and or if you're not blocking everything, what people are adopting and using in their day-to-day. There's a question about how do packages in the public registry get classified as vulnerable. I believe there's a link that I don't have it handy on me right now, but if you go and look at our documentation around security and vulnerabilities, there's a whole workflow and process around that. There's a number of areas that we do our own research in. There's a number of places where developers in the open source community contribute their own findings and report vulnerabilities to us. We maintain a central list of what's been disclosed and what's about to be disclosed, and we go through a very specific workflow for disclosing those information. And this is the same centralized list that a lot of people are using in many other technologies and products around the JavaScript ecosystem. Another question is, how do, no, I already read that question. What if we're already using a different product for artifact storage and data publishing? So again, you can, all the products that you probably rely on or use today in terms of storing your artifacts and or publishing artifacts for a centralized location, no matter what the product is, at some point or some shape or form, your developers are either using NPM public registry and or those products themselves are still proxying back to the public registry. So the workflow that we're exposing for you here and the value that you're getting from controlling those workflows doesn't take away from your ability to store things in a different place or have a different kind of workflow somewhere else. So I wouldn't say that it's one or the other. You definitely get more of the package when you're going through the NPM Enterprise product. You get everything from artifact storage all the way to workflow design and some of the features that we're going to start implementing around reporting and all of that. But you don't have to necessarily move away from that if you want to still leverage the ability of controlling your developer workflows, controlling the tokens that they're using for the public registry, and controlling the security and the privacy of access to the public and open source packages.
Great. Thank you, Ahmad. As mentioned earlier, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the same link you're using now. We've also added some related materials which are available through the attachment tab at the bottom of your player. This is where you can find today's slides, add your name to the waitlist for enterprise vulnerable reporting, and other related material. Finally, if you like what you heard today, please tweet out your thoughts on today's webinar using hashtag #NPMFacts. Thank you for joining.